If you haven't followed what's been going on in Washington, last year they didn't pass a budget, and then therefore we didn't have any appropriation bills that were passed, which means the government is funded to March 4th of this year. Normally a budget process and an appropriation process would fund the government to October 1st. Well, we are now confronted with a situation where we got to figure out how we're going to fund the government past March 4th. And last week, the House passed a continuing resolution to fund the government. And what we did, though, is we cut on an annualized basis, or a 12-month period of time, $100 billion, most of it out of non-defense discretionary spending. However, there was a slice of pie that came out of defense spending as well, I think about $16 billion. That's going to go to the Senate. The Senate is not going to pick up that bill and vote on it, so I would submit that's probably going nowhere, the work from last week. And what's really going to happen is if we don't pass a bill before March 4th, the government shuts down. And that's a really bad situation, I think. No one wants to see the government shut down. I think we want to see both houses come together and find a way to fund the government and keep it going. But I think you're going to see two sides butt heads on this. The Senate has been talking about wanting to fund the government at current levels, the 2010 levels. And I think the House is in a position saying, listen, you may not want to cut $61 billion like we proposed, but you have to come over and propose some cuts here. We can't continue going on at the current funding levels. So I hope there's going to be an agreement. We have, again, sent a bill to the Senate. We haven't heard anything back from them. We're going to see what happens this week. Again, hopefully both sides can come together and agree to reduce the size of our spending, and with that, continue to fund our government. That's the first thing that's going on. The second thing in regard to our budget is the president, now we're talking about, that's 2011. 2012, we're starting to talk about the budget process that begins funding on October 1st. The president submitted his budget, 2 weeks ago? A week ago. And now that kicks us up to start working on our budget process in the House. And you're going to see probably a great debate with the two proposals that are going to come out on how we fund the government starting October 1st for the 2012 fiscal year. And the third thing that we're going to see coming up is the debt ceiling. You guys know that we are going to reach that debt ceiling, whether it's April, May, or June. We are going to tap out our credit limit in the federal government. And there's going to be a great conversation and debate as to whether we raise the debt ceiling, and if so, by how much, and what has to happen for us to raise the debt ceiling. And I guess I'll tell you what my view is in the House, and I think a lot of people are on the same page, is that we have all this prior spending, and you can't balance your home budget or your business budget just by snapping your fingers and saying you want to balance your budget. It oftentimes takes time to implement policies to get your spending under control, whether it's in your house or in your business. And I think the same thing is true with the federal government. I think that if, again, there are concessions on spending, bringing spending levels down, there will be a movement to increase the debt ceiling. But I think it'll be tough to pass a bill in the House to increase the debt ceiling if there aren't concessions on spending. And obviously we're talking a lot now about budgets and spending and deficits. I think it's important for everyone to know where we stand as a country in regard to this debt. If you look at, and I wish I had a diagram I could draw for you, but if you think of a pie chart with regard to our debt, 60% of our budget is mandatory spending, which is Medicare, Medicaid, Social Security, interest on the debt, VA spending, food stamps, things like that, mandatory spending. It's 60% of the budget. And basically, every dollar that comes in to the federal coffers can fund 60% of what we lay out. The other 40% is borrowed. And you can break that 40% down almost into two. 20% is military spending, and 20% is everything else you think of as government. This other discretionary spending. It's the Department of Education, of Energy, Health and Human Services, Department of Justice. All these agencies that we think of as government fall into that other, it's a little less than 20%, roughly 18%. which is this discretionary spending portion. The $100 billion that we're looking at cutting in the continuing resolution that's going to fund the government from March 4th to October 1st, most of those cuts are coming out of that discretionary spending portion of the pie, which is a very small portion of the pie. And the cuts that were made were, I would say, pretty significant when we see how they're going to impact programs that we all see in our everyday life. But it's important because right now our federal debt is $14 trillion. Our federal debt is $14 trillion. This year, we are going to borrow $1.6 trillion this year. This is unsustainable. We cannot continue down this path of borrowing and spending. There are serious economic consequences for the rate of borrowing our country is engaging in right now. And I think what's important as a country and as a community is that we come together and acknowledge the problem that we face as a country with regard to this debt. Because if we don't face this challenge of debt, it is going to swallow us alive. I don't know how many of you deal with debt in your own life, but you know that debt and interest, if it gets too high, it can consume you. You can't dig out. And our government is about to cascade off a cliff that we can't get out of with regard to debt. Our interest payments are significant, and it's only increasing, especially with some fears of inflation, how much of our budget is going to be eaten up just on interest payments on the debt. So it's a problem that we face, that we have to address, and I guess I would submit this to all of you. We have a great country that has met adversity from our very beginning. I mean, you look back to the Revolutionary War, the Civil War, the Great Depression, the World Wars, the Cold War. Every generation has had their own challenge. I would suggest to you all that this debt crisis is the challenge of our generation. And we first have to acknowledge that we have a problem, and then we have to come together and find solutions to address the problem. And I think there's some reform that has to take place. There's some cuts that have to take place. But we all have to be on the same page, because if we don't come together and figure out how we get the debt under control, there is no doubt that we are going to pass off to our next generation a far lower standard of living than the one that we all inherited from our parents. And for me, I find that to be unacceptable, to think that they're going to be stuck paying off the debt from our spending in our generation and prior generations. I find that to be irresponsible. So I think we have to hit this head on, acknowledge where we stand as a country, and then move forward with solutions that are based on the values of our community and the values of our country. So I know that's an incredibly happy note for you all, but I wanted to lay the groundwork on where that's at and kind of what we're going to be working on in the House, and what we have been working on in the House is trying to drive a dialogue on what we do with debt. I got to tell you this, I don't think capping spending levels for 2010 is the right philosophy. I don't believe that, because since 2008 we have increased non-defense discretionary spending, which is the area we're cutting from. We've increased that by 24%. If you add in the stimulus spending on top of that, it's increased since 2008 by 84%. We have ramped up the spending, and now to say we want to cap it at that ramped up level, I would suggest doesn't make sense. Our government ran fine in 2008. Let's try to bring these levels down to a more sustainable level, whether it's 2008 or 2007. Let's try to reduce that spending back to a time where it was a little more reasonable. Still probably inflated, but more reasonable than where it's at right now. So with that, that's what we're working on.